Assalamu alaikum. My name is Rafi Husseini and welcome to this special episode of Helping Hand's monthly video bulletin. Let's look at the impact that you made in this challenging year. Despite such a challenging year, you've helped 11 million lives in 2020. 2020 has shown us how fragile life is, but it also showed us the power of community. Through HHRD's COVID-19 relief, you've helped bring ease to more than 1 million lives around the world. You've helped 21,000 orphans and 1,200 children with disabilities. You've helped fed, nourished and educated them when they have nobody else for them. Last Ramadan, you helped feed more than 220,000 people. Through our global Qurbani program, you helped provide meat for more than 1 million people in over 60 countries. You helped empower more than 3,000 individuals through our skills development and livelihood program, most of whom are women and young men. Now they're able to sustain themselves and contribute to the society. You help provide hygiene and water services to more than 500,000 people. You also help provide disaster relief, shelter for refugees, winter provisions, and health services, and much more. With your generous support, nearly 7.5 million people received your donations of in-kind items, which included medical supplies, school furniture, clothes, and other items. During this pandemic year 2020, we did not take anything for granted. And none of this would have happened without your contribution. And without you, this would not have been possible. Thank you for your contribution and thank you for what you continue to do.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. A'udhu billahi minash shaitani rajim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My name is Adil Sheikh. I'm the Regional Manager for Helping Hand for Relief and Development in New York City, Long Island, and Westchester County. Welcome to our program that takes an Islamic as well as a legal look at wills and estate planning. It's my great honor to introduce my first guest, Sheikh Ismail Isa, founder and director of Tartil Academy at the Muslim Center of Greater Princeton. Al-Azhar graduate with specialization in Quranic sciences and the 10 recitations. He has taught Tajweed, Qiraat, and Quranic sciences at different masajid and institutions in Egypt, the UK, and Ireland. Sheikh Ismail Isa has won several Quran competitions in Egypt and has also participated in the 2006 International Quran Competition in Makkah. He started leading Tarawih at the age of 13, mashallah. He was also one of the youngest imams at the first masajid that was built in Egypt and Africa. Lastly, the Sheikh has been a part of many different Quran conferences, competitions, and conventions. Sheikh, I've made everyone wait long enough. Please take it away. Bismillah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. كتب عليكم إذا حضر أحدكم الموت إن ترك خيرا الوصية للوالدين والأقربين بالمعروف حقا على المتقين فمن بدله بعدما سمعه فإنما إثمه على الذين يبدلونه إن الله سميع عليم فمن خاف من موص جنفا أو إثما فأصلح بينهم فلا إثم عليه إن الله غفور رحيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم للرجال نصيب مما ترك الوالدان والأقربون وللنساء نصيب للنساء نصيب مما ترك الوالدان والأقربون مما قل منه أو كثر نصيبا مفروضا. وإذا حضر القسمة أولو القربى واليتامى والمساكين فارزقوهم منه وقولوا لهم قولا معروفا. وليخشى الذين لو تركوا من خلفهم ذرية ضعافا خافوا عليهم فليتقوا الله وليقولوا قولا سديدا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا شهادة بينكم إذا حضر أحدكم الموت حين الوصية اثنان ذوا عدل منكم أو آخران من غيركم إن أنتم ضربتم في الأرض فأصابتكم مصيبة الموت تحبسونهما من بعد الصلاة فيقسمان بالله إن ارتبتم لا نشتري به ثمنا ولو كان ذا قربى ولا نكتم شهادة الله إنا إذا لمن الآثمين. فإن عثر على أنهما استحقا إثما فآخران يقومان مقامهما من الذين استحق عليهم الأوليان فيقسمان بالله لشهادتنا أحق من شهادتهما وما اعتدينا إنا إذا لمن الظالمين. ذلك أدنى أن يأتوا بالشهادة على وجهها أو يخافوا أن ترد أيمان بعد أيمانهم واتقوا الله واسمعوا والله لا يهدي القوم الفاسقين. صدق الله العظيم.
MashaAllah. Sheikh, Jazakallah khair for a heartwarming recitation. Brothers and sisters, the Sheikh will be joining us again at the end of the program. His segments are in addition to our hour-long program. Now, please welcome my next guest, Brother Omar Baig, who is a resident of Long Island, New York, as well as myself, and the Director of Operations and Development at HHRD, Brother Omar. In just a few minutes, please tell us, what is HHRD and why do the program now?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. As with all things, we begin with the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. I want to thank everyone for joining us at this event. Where there's a will, there's a way. The importance of Islamic inheritance law in estate planning. We felt this was an imperative event that we needed to do. Alhamdulillah, by the grace of Allah, Helping Hand has been active in over 50 countries around the world, offering programs that range all across from social skills development, from emergency relief, water for life programs, children with disabilities programs, comprehensive physical rehab programs, healthcare programs, seasonal programs, youth empowerment programs. We do a massive in-kind program as well. But probably the most important program that Helping Hand offers is the orphan sponsorship program. That is something that we hold very close to our heart. To date, we have had the pleasure of being able to steward over 44,000 orphans across the globe. We're currently assisting over 19,000 orphans. And it's just one of those things where we feel like, well, that's going to affect somebody else. But little do we remember that death is unfortunately a part of life. And there will come a time where we will have to go as well. So we often don't think about death because it's uncomfortable. We don't want to think about it. It makes us uncomfortable, obviously. But it's something that we have to address and plan for. About 15 years ago, my dad passed away, rahimahullah, and he had been in this country since 1972. He left Pakistan when my sister was about 10 days old, and a year later in 73, my mom came. Since then, throughout the 70s and 80s, we have over 300 members of our family in this country now. Nobody went back. Everybody is here. We don't have much family back home, and my dad passed away here. It's just one of those things that we don't think about, but estate planning is so important. And, we think about our assets, whether it's our house, our car, our businesses and whatnot, but probably the most important asset that we have is our children. And we want to make sure we are doing everything in our power to protect our assets, the most important of all being our children. And so when my dad passed away, rahimahullah, the first call that my 5 sisters and my mom made was to our beloved Sheikh Abdul Rahman Khan. And we have him on here next because he is the authority on all things Islamic inheritance law. If you look in Webster's dictionary under Islamic inheritance law, you will see a picture of Sheikh Abdul Rahman Khan. So without further ado, I want to send it to Brother Sheikh Abdul Rahman Khan to tell us and teach us about the Islamic inheritance law.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله أما بعد. Thank you, Brother Omar, for such a wonderful introduction, and I'm sure the photograph is not there. I have a very, very small window to share some thoughts, and so I just wanted to utilize every second of it. So we're going to go through quickly some thought process, ilm al-fara'id, importance of fara'id from the Quran and Sunnah. We are also going to look at difference between irth, wasi, and hiba, something that HHRD would be very interested in, and fixing on fixed portions, prerequisite for inheritance, and evidence of 1/3 as a will. And after that, we will have one of the legal minds, Brother Zohaib, who will take it from there from the legal perspective. So quickly, in Sharia, there is a discipline called ilm al-fara'id. the knowledge of inheritance. And this aspect of Sharia is highly neglected by Muslims. In fact, many Muslims, you tell them about faraid, and it sounds like it's a strange word, a strange concept. Initially, it was obligatory to write a will. Then comes Surah An-Nisa, which abrogated some of those initial laws. And it deals with the rules of calculating and dividing the inheritance, distributing it to each of the heirs, that make sure they have the right portion according to the Quran and Sunnah. And we know that death comes to every one of us. And however, there are things we can do to make our passing easier for those who leave behind. And one of that is this Islamically sound will. The absence of that, I can tell you, there will be a lot of division and chaos in families if things are not properly secured. So we are going to look at some of the importance of this faraid from Quran and the Sunnah. Some of the verses were recited so beautifully by the Hafizab, and so I will just go through with some of the translations, again, to save a little time in terms of our very limited scope. In chapter 4, verse 11, is translated, Allah commands you as regard your children's inheritance. And look at the word command. This is a very powerful word. I mean, everything that Allah asks us to do is actually a command. And so when He tells you this is a command, it is definitely something that we should take a lot more attention to. The male, that is your children, male, your sons, a portion equal to that of 2 females. And if they're only daughters, 2 or more, their share will be 2/3 of the inheritance. And if it's 1, her share is half. For the parents, a 1/6 share of the inheritance to each if the deceased left children. If no children, then the parents are the only heirs, the mother has 1/3. If the deceased left brothers and sisters, the mother has 1/6. The distribution in all cases is after the payment of legacies, that is the will that we're going to be talking about, may have bequeathed or debts. You know not which of them, whether your parents or your children, are nearest to you in benefit. These are the fixed shares, are ordained by Allah. And Allah is ever knower, all wise. So chapter 4, verse 11 gives a detail. Now, I don't expect anybody reading this for the first time will grasp all of it, but you will hear, half, 2/3, 1/6. You will hear these. And chapter 4, verse 12 deals with the spouses in that which your wives leave. So if the wife is the one who died, your share is half if they have no children. But if they have a child, then you get 1/4 of that which they leave after payment of legacies, that is the will that they may have bequeathed or debts, in that which you leave. So the husband here is the one who dies. Your wives' share is 1/4, that is 1/4 if you leave no child. But if you leave a child, they get 1/8 of that which you leave after payment of legacies that you may have bequeathed or debts. Then comes the verses 13 and 14. And I want our brothers and sisters to pay attention, because these are now words of consequences. Allah says these are the limits set by Allah. And whoever obeys Allah and His Messenger will be admitted by Him to gardens in paradise, under which rivers flow, abiding eternally therein. And that is the great attainment. And whosoever disobeys Allah and His Messenger and transgresses His limits, He will put him into the fire to abide eternally therein, and he will have humiliating punishment. So these two verses are coming immediately after those two verses that command, it's an order from Allah, and the details of that. The last verse that really deals directly is the last ayah of the same surah, Surah An-Nisa. In 176, they ask you for a legal verdict. Say Allah directs thus about kalala. Kalala means you do not have any parents and you do not have any children or grandchildren. So if a man dies, leaving a sister but no child, she shall have half of the inheritance. And such a deceased, if she was a woman who left no child, her brother takes her inheritance. If there are two sisters, they shall have 2/3 of the inheritance. And if they are brothers and sisters, the male will have twice the share of the female. Thus does Allah make clear to you His law, lest you go astray. And Allah is the knower of everything. Now you want to know, well, why am I going through all this cumbersome mathematical formula? Well, guess what? It is there. We are listening to it, especially in the month of Taraweeh. And when the Imam recites it, we say, oh, beautiful, beautiful. But this is what it is saying. It is giving us direction in a very precise mathematical way, to such a point that professors in England, this is in the Oxford University, they commented that Islam gives such a rich information about inheritance that no other system has such detail and structured. And by the way, we know Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they did not calculate, they did not know to read and write and calculate. And such precision is there in the Quran and then in the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well. So in this hadith, Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, he said, أقسموا المال بين أهل الفرائض على كتاب الله فما تركت الفرائض فلأولى رجل ذكر. Divide the wealth among the heirs with prescribed shares according to Allah's book. Whatever remains after that, it is for the male person who is nearest to the deceased. And this hadith is reported by Imam Bukhari and Muslim, or what we say agreed upon. And writing a will may be obligatory with regards to the dues of others where there is no proof, lest they be lost or neglected. So the Prophet ﷺ says, ما حق امرئ مسلم له شيء يوصي فيه يبيت ليلتين إلا وصيته مكتوبة عنده. That it is not permissible for any Muslim who has something to will for him to stay 2 nights without having his last will and testament written and keep ready with him. Again, this hadith is Bukhari and Muslim. Now, there's a number of other hadith, but there are some weakness in those hadith. A lot of hadith on Islamic inheritance, there are some weakness. And so I just chose these two to give us a parameter of which how important this knowledge is. Now, let's go and take a quick look at what this Islamic inheritance requires. So there are fixed portion, and those fixed portion can be a half, a quarter, 1/8, 2/3, 1/3, and 1/6. They are inheritors that can only receive by fixed portion. They are inheritors that can receive only through unfixed portion. Okay? And they are inheritors that can receive both through the fixed and unfixed portion. And don't think it is complicated. This session obviously is not meant for you to grasp everything, but a rule of thumb that you will understand is that females generally, okay, take fixed portion. So, and children obviously get the bulk of the wealth. So if you die and leave just a son, he gets everything. If you die and leave a son and a daughter, the son get twice as much as the daughter, but they pretty much get everything. We will come to that a little later. So when we talk about a half, most of it are females, like your daughter, your son's daughter. And I say son's daughter because granddaughter in English can mean your daughter who is not going to inherit. Your son's daughter is going to inherit, blood sister and paternal sister. Then quarter will be spouses, 1/8 will be wife alone. So it's not too difficult to, when you put all together. And similarly, 2/3 will be the same people who get a half, if they're 2 or more, less the husband. And 1/3 will be mother and maternal sibling, and 1/6 will be a little longer list. Okay, so I'm not going to go through that, but mainly it's a lot of mother, grandmothers, your son's daughter, some of your siblings, and so forth. The father also comes in here if they are children. So this is the scope. And when you have legal-minded people like our next speaker, he will tell you how easy it is to fill out your paper and have people to inherit their right amount. Now, we are going to go through with our wealth. There are some words that we normally use. And for those who would like to donate to ICNA or Helping Hand and so forth, there is something called hiba, which is a gift. There is something called wasiya, which is for your inheritors. That is what is called the wasiya is what is the 1/3 share that you can give who are not inheritors, and that is what you call residuary bequest. And the earth, which is the legacy, only your relatives will inherit from that. And so if you want to leave a gift, you want to give a gift, or you want to have 1/3 as your wasiya, up to these 2 points, you have some flexibility with your wealth. And the hiba is just generally done when you're alive. Wasiya is the 1/3 after you die, and the earth is what remains after you give this 1/3 to organization, maybe to some cause, to some person, whether it's Helping Hand, ICNA, or whoever, your masjid, your waqf, or whatever it is that you might want to give. And then comes the earth, which only the relatives will now inherit that. Now, there is some difference between the earth, the wasiya, and the hiba. The earth is instruction from Allah on how one's property is to be disposed of after one's death, or basically how it is to be given away after somebody dies. So once you die, this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My PowerPoint is sharing. I don't know whatever happened. Anyhow, let's proceed. So the earth is the instruction. Let me just give me 1 second here. Let me just make sure that the screen is sharing. So I just want to make sure that we are not I hope that helps. Sometimes these things have a mind of their own. Okay. All right. I hope that works. Okay, from current. Yeah, so earth is instruction from Allah, how one's wealth is distributed. And wasiya is a legal declaration of the testator, which with respect to his property, and he has up to 1/3 of his, we call it residually bequest because this is after some funeral arrangement and debts and so forth are paid, that you have 1/3 wealth. And then comes hiba, which is the property that is willingly given away whilst a person is alive. This does not come under the same ruling as a will. So if somebody is alive and they want to give some of their wealth away to an organization, for example, then he or she can do that in their capacity. Another difference here is wasiyah takes place after the person dies. So you cannot distribute 1/3 of the wealth while the person is still alive. Whereas hiba, a gift, is given while the person is alive, and you give a person a gift. And a gift, if you cannot do it on your deathbed. It's not allowed. Any financial decision while you're on your deathbed, it will definitely fall under earth. Wasiyah, which is the 1/3 wealth, is revocable. So if I say I want to give helping hand 1/3 of my wealth when I die, and 2-3 months before I die, I said, you know what, I don't want to give them. You can revoke that. Hiba, you cannot revoke. When you give somebody, if I give helping hand $10,000, I can't say, please give me back my money. It's not really allowed to do that. Hiba is something that you give somebody a gift, then it is not allowed to take back your gift like that. Wasiyah, also the 1/3 of the wealth that you have at your disposal to give cannot be given to an inheritor who will inherit from the remainder of the wealth. They cannot receive from that 1/3 unless everybody in that group who is inheriting will agree that yes, maybe mom can get something more, or this brother who is poor can get something out of that 1/3. Other than that, if anybody objects to it, then it cannot take place for someone who is already going to inherit. Whereas hiba, a gift, you can give it to an inheritor. You can say in the lifetime, you can give someone of the inheritors, your children, your mom, your dad, some gift you can give to them. Wasiyah should be in writing, and this is where I would leave that for our brother Zohaib to talk about a little more. Carrying out the will is an important matter, and there is stern warning issued to those who change it. When it comes to children and giving of a hiba, some guidelines should be aware of, and this is a hadith Nu'man, where he wanted to give some of his children, and in fact, he wanted to give Nu'man and not his other children. Prophet ﷺ did not approve that. This is important because when somebody dies and you leave your wealth, the first thing you need to take out is your burial expenses. These days, burial expenses can mean from the hospital to the funeral, the vehicle, the process, the washing, the storage, the burial plot. Then if he has debts to pay, those debts should be taken out from his wealth and be given to the one that he owes. And there are debts that can be pinpointed, and there are debts that are general. So what are pinpointed, you give that back, that exact material thing to the person that he owes. And general debts, like he owes 5,000 to this one or 3,000 to that one, he will give back the general debts. Then comes the wasiyah, which is 1/3. If you want to, again, this is very optional, and Allah gives us this flexibility of using 1/3 of our wealth. And brothers and sisters, there's a lot of goodness coming out of this 1/3 of the wealth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed us to give this 1/3 of the wealth. And then comes the inheritance. So you have to remember that we'll come a little in a minute or so, we'll talk about the 1/3 a little more, but this is optional. So let us say you have a scenario like this. At the time of death, you have $150,000. So burial expenses, let's say, is $10,000. What remains now is $140,000 out of that. Things that identified, let's say $15,000, comes down to $125,000. General debts you owe to people, to institutions, whatever it is, $17,000, comes down to $108,000. So your $150,000 is reduced, is going down. If you do wasiyah, if you take 1/3, you have to take 1/3 of this $108,000, which is $36,000. So now you leave with $72,000. This is what will go for inheritance. So if your inheritance, it's you have a wasiyah, then your inheritance is $72,000. Without a wasiyah, it is $108,000 that your relatives, children, wife, parents, and so forth will inherit from that. What is the evidence of this 1/3 will? It's a hadith in which Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, he was very sick. Later on, he overcome that sickness. But he was telling the Prophet ﷺ he wanted to give away his wealth. The Prophet ﷺ said, it's too much, until he came to 1/3. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, "Thuluthu wa thuluthu kathir," that even 1/3, but even 1/3 is too much. And then he also said, "Inna Allah tasaddaqa alaykum inda wafatikum bi thuluthi amwalikum ziyadatan lakum fi a'malikum." And this is a very, very powerful message to all of us. And this hadith is saying Allah was being generous to you when he allowed you to give 1/3 of your wealth in charity when you die, so as to increase your good deeds. Because we know, brothers and sisters, that when you die, what happens? Your deeds are cut off, except for sadaqatun jariyah, the perpetual charity that you give. So if you give to Helping Hand and they continue to help orphans, they continue to dig well for people who cannot get water, so long as that water is flowing, you are in your grave receiving that benefit from it. And so this hadith is reported by Ibn Majah, and it is classified as Sahih, that Allah wants to be generous with us so that we can leave 1/3 for various causes, that when we die, our good deeds will be increased. And by giving to these institutions, it certainly does increase. And so it is allowed to write your will concerning 1/3 of your wealth, and you should not be giving your wealth to one of the heirs unless they are all the other heirs agreed to that. So with this, just whetting our appetite on this topic, I will stop here. I think my time is also up. And so if there's any quick question, I will be more than happy to answer. I'm really sorry if you did not see the screen. I tried my best technologically to show the screen, but it is what it is. And sometimes these computers and so have their own soul. Yeah.
Yes, Sheikh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, it was very beneficial. Didn't need any help. You were more than enough. So I'd like to point out to the audience that Sheikh Abdool Rahman Khan is also a member of the Fiqh Council of North America. He's a graduate of the Islamic University of Medina al-Munawwara, who specializes in Islamic inheritance. Sheikh, I do have a question that comes up a lot regarding your talk.
Yeah.
If all inheritors are present, then whom among them will inherit?
Yes, good question. Obviously, there are a lot of inheritors. Male inheritors can be your father, your son, your grandson, your blood brother, meaning same mother, same father, your paternal brother, same father, different mother, your maternal brothers, your your blood uncle, your paternal uncle, your blood uncle's sons, your paternal uncle's sons, someone's husband. So if a lady dies, her husband. So if a lady dies, only 3 people will inherit from the male. Let's say she leaves only male inheritors. Only 3 can inherit. Her father, her husband, and her son. If she leaves everybody, all the female and male inheritors, the only people that can, or anybody dies, only 5 people can inherit. Your mother, your father, your son, your daughter, and a spouse. If you're a woman, the husband, or if the husband, it will be the wife. So these people must always inherit. Everybody else will be thrown off, as we say. You get thrown off from the inheritance.
Okay.
And as you'll have less of your male direct relative, if you don't have a father, you don't have a son, and then you start going to the next in line of your relationship. And Sharia has given you all of that in the Islamic inheritance. So remember, your son is very powerful. Your daughter is very powerful. The mother, the father, even though they get less than the children, and the spouses, the husband and the wife. Everybody else comes after that.
Okay, Sheikh, Jazakallah khair. I wish we had more time to get into it more depth. Maybe inshallah next time. Now for our next segment, Brother Zohaib Mustafa will speak about the legal aspects of this subject. Zohaib Mustafa is a practicing attorney in the state of New York, where he leads a boutique law firm, Mustafa Law PC. His firm practices in the area of real estate, business, estate law, and Islamic inheritance for individuals practicing the Islamic faith. Apart from his professional background, he has also been very involved in local nonprofit organizations in various capacities. Brother Zohaib Mustafa, please take it away.
Assalamu wa barakatuh. First, I want to thank for giving me this. Thank brothers setting up this event. Sheikh with us as well. Also wanted.
Brother Zohaib, we cannot make out the words that you're saying.
Give me one moment.
Yeah, it's very, very slow. So there's a lot of background noise, and then the volume may be too much.
Okay.
There's an echo, so you may want to come back in maybe. Brother Ali, do we have a video that we can put on meanwhile? And Brother Zohaib, maybe you can come back in, inshallah.
They feed with food despite their own desire for it, the indigent and the orphan and the captive, saying, "We feed you purely for the sake of God. We desire no reward from you, nor thankfulness." What did we do when we heard the news of their suffering? Did you choose to look away and ignore, or were you there, ready to lend your hand?
Okay.
Let's give this another try. How's this?
It's perfect.
We're good?
Dive right in, please.
Okay. So I just wanted to first start off by saying thank you to Helping Hand for giving me this opportunity, Brother Omar and Brother Adil for coordinating this event, Sheikh Abdool Rahman for his wealth of knowledge, and of course, Brother Ali, who's the tech guy behind the scenes, and they never get enough credit, so definitely wanted to give a shout out there. I don't have much time. There's a lot to cover. It's a very detailed and dense topic. So we're really going to hit the ground running. I'll try to cover it slowly, but I definitely want to give you a good idea of what to expect in terms of Islamic legal planning. And without further ado, we will start. So the object of this presentation is that we want to gain knowledge. As Sheikh Abdul Rahman mentioned as well, we gained a lot of knowledge from his segment. Hopefully we will learn the legal aspects from my presentation. But gaining knowledge is one thing, but then we have to implement this knowledge as well. So after this presentation is done, we definitely want to figure out how we can implement the knowledge that we learned today to apply it in our life. As a legal disclaimer, none of this constitutes any legal advice. This is only for informational purposes, does not establish any attorney-client privilege. And also, I'm licensed to practice in the state of New York. Every state is somewhat different in terms of their laws, so definitely speak with a qualified attorney in your locality. So when we speak about end-of-life considerations, aside from a will and trust, there's other things that we should be thinking of. Sometimes people want to think of purchasing a funeral plot. Obviously, nobody knows where they're going to pass away, but that's an option that's open to us and to consider. We want to put money aside for funeral expenses. About a year ago, in my local mosque, I remember the imam sharing with me that somebody had put money aside, which was in terms of $4,000 or $5,000, as funerals can be very expensive nowadays, so it wouldn't be a burden on the family at the time of passing. So this is something that we also want to give a consideration to, that putting money aside, because sometimes it so happens that somebody passes away and it may be difficult for the family to come up with the finances. Of course, we have a number of great Islamic organizations that will chip in to help, but if it's within our means, it's definitely something that we should think about. Another is a health proxy. A health proxy, in short, designates somebody to make health decisions for you should you be incapacitated. Then we have a durable power of attorney. Now, let's say you're traveling, or you're incapacitated, or you're out of state, or for some reason somebody can't get to you. There's a real estate transaction that needs to be made. There's a bank account that needs to be opened. There's some financial decisions that need to be made. You could designate, whether it's your son, daughter, close family member, close friend, or maybe even your attorney, to act on behalf of you. And that's called a durable power of attorney, and it comes in handy. The last is a living will. A living will gives clear guidance to individuals how, what measures you would like to have somebody take to kind of revive you, or, do not resuscitate. So those are things to keep in mind, when you're thinking of end-of-life considerations. Now we're going to speak a little bit about vocab, because we're going to be speaking about a number of things. So it's good that we're become well acquainted with these words. So living will and health proxy basically designate your end-of-life decisions. To what length should somebody go to kind of resuscitate you or revive you? Who should make health decisions for you if you're incapacitated? Last will and testament, it's something that designates beneficiaries, what your last wishes are, how your distribution should be should you pass away. Now, wasiya, sometimes people use this to replace the word will. Sheikh can speak a little bit more upon that if that's appropriate, but wasiya, like Sheikh mentioned, is actually a part of your will. So it's that 1/3 that Sheikh touched on in detail, and we'll speak a little bit about it a little bit later on. Testator is the one who's signing the will. Now, an executor or administrator, these words are sometimes used interchangeably, but an executor is somebody who's designated in a will to manage that person's estate. An administrator is when somebody does not have a will and the court appoints somebody to handle the proceeds of their estate. Now, let's speak about estate. When we speak about estate, everyone thinks of maybe like a castle in England, right? Or some mansion, or some type of area where gold is stored. An estate is different for everyone, right? Estate is basically your belongings. What personal belongings do you have? Cash on hand, property, cars, gold, jewelry, diamonds, watches. That is your estate. A trustee is somebody who manages a trust, which we'll touch upon a little bit more in detail later on. Beneficiary, somebody designated in your will to receive the proceeds of your estate. Witness is somebody who sees you sign a will, and intestacy, or I should say intestacy laws, are used in the event you pass away without a will, and then New York State or the state that you live in, their laws would govern. Now, what is the goal of estate planning at the end of the day? The goal of estate planning is to control property while you are alive and well, take care of ourselves if we become disabled, take care of our loved ones once we pass away. And at the end of the day, you want to save every tax dollar, professional fee, your time, court costs legally possible. And how you can reduce that is how you plan for your estate. Now, some of this goes hand in hand to what Sheikh Abdul Rahman mentioned, and there will be an overlap, and that's just because that's how this topic is. So sometimes, you get this question, especially when you're dealing with clients, right? Why do women inherit less? Why do the sons get more? Why does the wife get less? Why does the daughter get less than the son? Surah Al-Nisa literally translate to the women, right? Islamic laws came to liberate and gave women rights during the days of ignorance. It was a big blessing that women can now inherit Islamically and legally, part of their husband's wealth. And this was, a big game changer in the days of ignorance. Why do women inherit less? I'm sure there are a number of reasons, and Sheikh can touch on them a little bit more eloquently. But Islamically speaking, and I guess morally and ethically speaking, the husbands are there to care for the wives, and at old age, the children are there to care for the parents. So that's one of the things. Now, given the current contemporary times, what if my daughter needs more than my son? What if my wife needs more? Some ways around that are to maybe increase the dowry that you give to your wife when you get married. That will be a debt against the husband. Maybe you want to cut out the 1/3 portion completely, and you don't want to give that 1/3, so the inheritors will take in more. And transferring property inter vivos. This is what Sheikh Abdul Rahman mentioned as hiba, which is a gift during the person's lifetime. So if you feel like your daughter will inherit less, your wife will inherit less, while you are still alive, you could give them property, money to kind of make up for them. And everyone's financial background is a little bit different. So that's a judgment call that you would have to make. Now, speaking exclusively of New York State, what are New York State will requirements? The person has to be over 18 years old. He has to be of sound mind. He has to be capacitated, right? He can't be incapacitated. He has to know what he's reading, what is he signing. It requires a signature from the testator, which is the person who's signing his own will. It must be two disinterested witnesses, meaning it cannot be a beneficiary in the will. So let's say my father wants to make a will. I cannot act as a witness to his will because I would be a direct beneficiary. It must list the beneficiary by name. Your son, daughter, your wife, your mother, your father. It has to be in writing. And this is optional. There should be a self-proving affidavit on the back. So what happens when you execute a will, again, just speaking for New York, on the second to last page, you have two witnesses sign. And these two witnesses state that I saw XYZ sign a will, and he knew what he was signing, and he read the contents of it. Now, the self-proving affidavit is signed by a notary, and it's usually the last page. And what that last page says was that there was a notary on scene who saw the two witnesses witness the testator sign the will. And one perk of that is when the will goes to probate, the witnesses don't have to show up, or the witnesses don't have much to do because there was a notary that certified the witnesses viewing the will. Now, what if I die without a will? Usually, well, almost all the time, an administrator is appointed. This can be sometimes a very close family member, or depending on the situation, can be, somebody not so close. And this is not a person that maybe you wanted to administer or be the executor of your estate. Sometimes a bond for the administrator is issued. So that's another financial burden on the family, because the court wants some security that the assets are going to be distributed. So the court requires a bond. So this is a key thing. You cannot, or you would have not, appointed a guardian for your children. So, Brother Omar touched on this a little bit, but, you definitely want to have a will to appoint a guardian. Who's going to take care of your children when you pass away? Is it going to be your wife? Do you want a close brother to do it? Now, what if there's a freak accident and you and your wife both pass away together? Who's going to be there to take care of the children? This is something you should definitely have a say over, and a will allows you an opportunity to do that. And if there's no will, you do not have that opportunity, unfortunately. Property assets of minor children will usually be held in a trust. Who manages that trust is also up to the courts. And more so importantly, the distribution would be according to New York State if you pass away without a will. And this would obviously be contrary to Sharia law. New York State law of descent and distribution. So this is, again, not talking about Islamic law. This is talking about New York State law if you pass away without a will. Now, the spouse receives all if no children. Now, if there are children, the spouse receives the first $50,000. So the way I like to give the example is, let's say you leave $100,000. The spouse would get the first $50,000 plus half of the residual estate. And that would be another $25,000. So now the wife, or the spouse, I should say, has $75,000. The remaining 25 would be divided in equal share amongst the remaining children. Now, if there's no spouse, the children will receive the entirety of it in equal shares. And the parents are not considered in New York State law if you pass away without a will. So that's also something contrary to Islamic law. The only similarity it shares is that it also requires the debts and the expenses are to be paid first before the estate is distributed. Now, what makes a will Islamic? Is it a halal sticker? What exactly is it that makes it Islamic? It's the premise here is that we are not the owners of our wealth. It is Allah who's the owner of our wealth. We are just trustees of it. We also want to follow the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are told how to earn our wealth, spend it, and the most forgotten is how to distribute it upon passing. Now, the importance of an Islamic will. You could, of course, state that you don't want an autopsy done. There's a little asterisk there, is that sometimes according to the law of the respective state, depending on how you passed away, an autopsy must be mandated by law, and that's something that you cannot forego. You can appoint a guardian for your children should something happen to you. You could state your funeral and burial rights. You could pay outstanding debt that's owed. And wasiya acts as Rahman is 1/3, and the Sharia distribution would be 2/3 of that. Just to give you an idea, I visualized it a lot. I think it's easier to see on the eyes. In the orange, you would see 1/3, and then the remaining in the blue, you would see as the 2/3. And this would, of course, be after your debts and your funeral expenses are taken care of. Your funeral expenses should be reasonable expenses. As Muslims, we're told, our coffins have to be simple. We should be shrouded in a white cloth, nothing extravagant. And this is also paid by the estate when the person passes away. There's different debts that need to be paid also. I believe Sheikh touched on this as well, so I'm going to skip this slide. Now let's speak about the wasiya aspect of it. Now, John Harvard, who was he? Just a fun fact. John Harvard was a person who went to New College. New College later came to be known as Harvard College. John Harvard, when he passed away, he left half of his estate to Harvard College. And they decided, well, New College at the time it was called, and they decided to name the college after him, which is now known as Harvard College. And Harvard now today, I believe, has the largest endowment of over $40 billion. And this is something as Muslims that we don't give to Islamic organizations, or we forget that this is a possibility to kind of help different organizations grow. There are restrictions in the wasiya aspect. I'm sorry, there's no restrictions on distribution. You can't give to a non-Muslim, you can't give to adopted child. Max is 1/3 of the estate, and Sheikh Abdul Rahman touched on the hadith from Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. This is not mandatory to leave. You do not have to leave it. And you cannot name the heirs to increase their share. Everything is ordained by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but as Sheikh Abdul Rahman mentioned, with the consent of the heirs, that's something that you can do. And this could also be used to pay debts towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I believe Sheikh Abdul Rahman touched on that. So who can inherit? Marriage or blood, yes, those individuals can inherit. Step or adopted children, those individuals cannot inherit. If you kill the individual, the decedent who passed away, and you were a beneficiary in there, those individuals cannot inherit. Changing religion, if somebody's apostate, you cannot inherit. Widow remarries, yes. Disobedient children still inherit, and infants inherit as well. Sheikh touched on the evidences. I'm going to skip that. Possible male inheritors. I'm not going to touch on it too much in detail, but these are all individuals that can possibly inherit from the male side. And these are possible female inheritors, all individuals that could possibly inherit from the female side. The key thing, as Sheikh Abdul Rahman mentioned, is not everyone inherits. It all depends who survives you at the end of the day, right? Who's left at the end. And based on that, according to Sharia principles, those individuals will inherit. Now, I made this graph to make it a little bit easier to understand. What if I don't have an Islamic will? And what if I do have it? So let's go through this quickly. Eunice passes away, has a legally valid Islamic will. It goes through something called probate, which is a court-ordered process. Assets are distributed according to Sharia principles outlined in the will. Let's say Eunice passes away, doesn't have a legally valid Islamic will. He passes away intestate, which means it has to be distributed according to New York State laws because he didn't have a will, goes through probate, goes through New York State intestacy laws. Legal consequences are at odds with Sharia. It's contrary to what Sharia law states. The heirs can then choose to distribute it according to Sharia law, but they are not legally obligated to do so. And dealing with things that I have is once a person passes away and certain individuals are not legally obligated to do certain things, it becomes very difficult for the family. So it's definitely good that we sort those out in the beginning. Sheikh Abdul Rahman touched on different fractions, 1/8, 2/12, 7/12. These are all distributions as per Islamic law, but sometimes these are very difficult to understand. So what I did was try to break it down into percentages and create pie graphs, so it's easier for us to see on the eyes. So let's give our first example. Muhammad dies intestate, meaning he passed away without a will. He's survived by his wife Amina, one son Waqas, and one daughter Farial. Muhammad had an estate of $240,000 and no outstanding debt. So Muhammad died in New York without a will, and this is the first example. Again, this is not Sharia distributions. This is if an individual were to pass away without a will. If Muhammad died in New York, for example, then the above distribution would be dramatically different under the state's intestacy laws, whereby Amina, the wife, would be entitled to $50,000 plus 1/2 of the remainder for a total of $145,000, and Waqas and Farial would share equally in the remainder, getting $47,500 each. Now, let's say Muhammad had an Islamic will. So under Sharia inheritance law, without the 1/3 wasiya option, Amna is entitled to 1/8 or $30,000. Waqas and Farial share the remaining $210,000. Since Muhammad, which is the son and Farial's brother, is a male, he receives a share twice that of Farial. So Muhammad is entitled to $140,000, which would equate to 2/3. And Farial is entitled to $70,000, which would be 1/3. Now let's talk about the same scenario, but with the 1/3 wasiya option. So just to make it easier, not go into detail because I did that in the last 2 slides, the 33% is already cut out for wasiya. The mother Amina gets the smallest share, which is 8%. The daughter Farial will get 20%, and this is just, it rounded up or down. The son would take home 40%. Now let's give a different example. You have a husband, son, and daughter, meaning the wife is survived by her husband, son, and daughter, and the wife passed away. The husband would get 25%, the daughter would get 25%, and the son would get the bulk of it at 50%. Now let's give a different scenario. Husband is survived by the wife, daughter, son 1, and son 2, meaning the husband passed away and he leaves behind a wife, daughter, and 2 sons. The wife gets about 12%, daughter gets about 18%, and the 2 sons share the bulk of it at 35%. The husband now leaves, and this is all under Islamic distribution. The husband is survived by 1 parent. So now we threw a parent into the mix. His wife, son, and daughter. So depending on, it doesn't matter who the parent is, father or mother, they're going to take about 17%. The wife is going to take about 12%. The daughter is going to take about 24%, and the son will take double in that, and about 48%. Just 2 more examples. And now this is a different scenario. The husband is survived by his father, mother, wife, daughter, son 1, and son 2. So now the husband leaves behind both parents. So both parents would take about, again, the fractions rounded up a little bit just to make sure we had 100, but around 16 or 17% for the parents, about 12% for the wife, daughter at 11%, and the sons would take about 22%. And this is the last example. And in this case, we have the husband leaves behind his father, his mother, his wife, his daughter, his 2 sons, and he also decides to give 1/3 of his estate to charity. So the 33% would be taken out for wasiya. The 2 sons would get about 15% each. The daughter would take about 7%, the wife about 8%, and the father and the mother would take about 11%. Now, what is a person's estate at the end of the day? And like I mentioned in the beginning, it's not a castle, it's not gold, it's not Rolex watches, it's what you have as an individual. And some things that are considered in that is clothes, cars, cash, books, furniture, businesses, debts payable to the deceased. So let's say you pass away, somebody else owes you money, that's also your estate, and jewelry as well. Distribution, the distribution should be done quickly. You must have consent of all inheritors to give to charity, and I believe Sheikh Abdul Rahman touched upon that as well. And right upon death, the money automatically becomes that of the heirs. Now, what's covered in a will? Because not everything is covered in a will. So probate estate is referring to when a person passes away, the will goes through something called probate. So this is property the person owns individually in his name. Personal assets such as, again, safety deposit box, cash, things of that nature. Car, individually owned bank accounts. Deed in only one person's name. So let's say you have a home and your name is the only name on the deed. That's something that would be governed on by a will. Non-probate asset, things that are not covered by a will. Joint property. So sometimes you have a deed recorded as, husband and wife. That automatically transfers to the wife upon death. Joint bank accounts. So a will does not control joint bank accounts. Again, just throw it in there, life insurance, that's something, they have a beneficiary for, and it goes directly to the beneficiary. Suppose you have IRAs, 401ks, pension plans, that goes directly to the beneficiary, and a will does not control that. Now, distribution according to Sharia terms. One thing I'd like to emphasize is that if you do want an Islamic will made, please speak with a qualified attorney. The reason being is that sometimes organizations or individuals come up with the will, and some things that I've seen is that in the will it says my estate will be distributed as Mufti/Imam says so. That's not valid. Upon my death, my executor will distribute my wealth according to Sharia. Not valid. I give everything to my son and we will distribute it according to Sharia. Not valid. I would like to add an asterisk to all those points though. This can easily be fixed by naming the distribution they're supposed to get and their names. Otherwise, you could risk an objection or an invalid will in surrogate's court. Modifications to a will. Whenever there's a life circumstance change, we should update our will. We get married, there's a divorce, there's a new child born, somebody passes away, and we should definitely update our will. So a codicil is basically an amendment to a will. It's not really practiced. Most people just recommend doing your will all over again. And codicil is basically attaching an amendment to the old will. And again, not so much in practice. It's just, you could go back to the attorney that you utilize and they could kind of just update the Word document and you could definitely execute the new will depending on what your life circumstance change was. So the $1 million question, Sharia law versus New York state law, is it compatible? Yes. Potential conflicts. There's something known as a spousal right of election. So even if your will says that my wife is to get 1/8 of my estate, she can still, by New York state law, bring an action to claim either $50,000 of your estate or 1/3 of your estate, whichever one is higher. Typically speaking, when individuals execute an Islamic will, the couple has an understanding that, this is the way I would like my estate to distribute it, and it's not challenged. But that's definitely a possibility by the spouse to do that. One way around it is having your spouse sign a waiver stating that they cannot contest this to ask for more money. Also, non-Muslim inheritance. So according to Sharia law, non-Muslims cannot inherit. This is something that I guess we will see how it plays out in court, but there is some old case law in it, which I picked up from like Ohio and somewhere else in the Midwest, of a Jewish couple that only wanted to give to their son, if he, did XYZ things according to the Jewish religion. And courts did uphold that, but I think it should be an interesting development to see how it plays out as we progress. Process for drafting a will. Gather info about assets, liabilities, gather info about family, think about the debts owed to people. Wasiya, is that something that you want to leave? Discuss it with your family, and do not leave it in a safety deposit box, because that's something that will be very difficult for somebody to find if your name is the only name on there. Business, it's good to have arbitration agreements, clarify who's the owner, what are the shares, what's the partnership agreement like. Benefits of a last will and testament, name. The pros are you can name guardians for minor children, name an executor for your estate, dictate who gets separate probate assets. The cons are you must go through a court-ordered process. It does not control joint owned property or bank accounts, and there's minimum tax reporting, options in that respect. Trust versus a will. Will is something that goes through a court-ordered process. Trust is something that's very intimate, private, and does not go through a court-ordered process, but is a lot more expensive. As I wrap it up, again, a reminder, this was not legal advice in any respect. This was only for informational purposes. And this is my contact information should you want to get in touch with me. Jazakallah khair. And Brother Adil, that pretty much wraps it up from my end.
Brother Zohaib, I do have some very common questions in regards to your talk. However, we have to be very quick, and you already have them. I sent them to you. They are, number one, is it true that the state can take your estate if you do not have a will? So let's do this like a fire round, please.
Yeah, so yes, they can take it, but they could only take it if you have no heirs, meaning you have no spouse, no children, no distant relatives, and there's nobody that can claim your estate, then it would go to New York State.
Okay. How can you revoke a will?
Literally, you pick it up and you tear it up.
Okay.
And that's something that would destroy your will, and that would show intention that you had intent to revoke your will.
Okay. The last one is, how long does the probate process take?
So probate process typically takes about 7 to 9 months, but given the situation with COVID, surrogate's court is almost non-functional to some degree. So this period, just to get basic letters, took maybe 5-6 months for some people.
Okay, very good. We wish we had more time. Brother Zohaib, Jazakallah khair for all this invaluable and timely information. Brothers and sisters, our last segment is a short dua. Jazakallah khair to everyone who made this possible and everyone who watches this presently and in the future. We do have a very high viewership today, mashallah, and this is something that will get a lot more viewership later on. You can share it with friends and family. I'm trying to be positive. We're getting messages as we're doing this in the last hour. People have passed away in our community, and it's very difficult to stay positive. However, Allahu Akbar, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them their place in the highest of heavens. As we brought this program to an end, I'd like Sheikh Ismail Isa to please jump back in and end our program by asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us get through these challenging times. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
اللهم لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك ولعظيم سلطانك. لك الحمد بالإسلام ولك الحمد بالإيمان ولك الحمد بالقرآن ولك الحمد بالأهل والمال والمعافاة. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد في الأولين وفي الآخرين وفي كل وقت وحين وفي الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين. اللهم ارزقنا شفاعته وأوردنا حوضه ولا تحرمنا زيارة مسجده، واسقنا من يده الشريفة شربة هنيئة مريئة لا نظمأ بعدها أبدا. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم، وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا. ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا. ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به، واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. اللهم اشف مرضانا ومرضى المسلمين. اللهم اشف مرضانا ومرضى المسلمين، وارحم موتانا وموتى المسلمين. اللهم ارفع عنا الوباء والبلاء والفتن والمحن. اللهم ارفع عنا الوباء والبلاء والفتن والمحن. اللهم عافنا في أبداننا، وعافنا في أسماعنا، وعافنا في أبصارنا. اللهم إنا نسألك العفو والعافية في الدين والدنيا والآخرة. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين، وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.